what are the returns on a social finance opportunity? One is a traditional financial return. We also expect some kind of impact return. How many people did you help for how long? How did their situation become better?
Today, I had a fascinating conversation with the Reverend Graham Singh. Graham likes to say that he builds bridges between the faith, government, finance, and heritage sectors to help create new community spaces. As you'll hear in our conversation, each of these sectors is seamlessly woven in his purpose-filled journey to help communities socially and spiritually. Graham currently serves simultaneously as CEO of Releven and as an Anglican priest. Now, Relevin is a charitable organization that's helping local communities find purposeful use for church facilities at a time when Canadian churches are suffering from what Graham and others view as a crisis of faith. They do this by preserving, restoring, and repurposing undervalued churches into community hubs and affordable housing. Now, Graham is a regular speaker and author on topics like urbanism, social finance, and social purpose real estate, among others. He's a regular expert on many news programs and a guest lecturer at Oxford's Said Business School. Graham exudes joy for his work. He has a genuine empathy for others and a true desire to serve. I think you'll see all of that here. Welcome to my conversation with Graham Singh. So you were telling me that you got some big plans this summer.
We are so excited. My wife is from France, and we'll be back over there for the summer. And everybody says, "Oh, you're avoiding Paris, right? With the Olympics." Oh, no. Actually, we're going in. We're going in for the games, and our daughter is in a professional stream of gymnastics, and her father, my father-in-law, bought us all tickets for the gymnastics finals at the Paris Olympics. So to take our little daughter, who she's in the stage where she could be heading in that direction herself. So it's a really special sports moment for us this summer.
Oh, that's awesome. And I understand your wife is from that area, right? I don't know if she's from Paris, but from France, right?
She's from Paris, yeah, she is.
Oh, my gosh. So what a trip.
We're really excited, and apparently a few people are being scared away. So that just means more room on the trains for us.
That's great. And maybe a little bit of sightseeing in there too. Maybe a little trip with family. I don't know.
We'll be down there. So Celine's family have a place in the south of France where we were married. And we'll be down there by the beach. So it's we're counting our blessings, Matt. I got to tell you, it's such a good time to be alive.
Well, you are always so filled of joy, and I'm really, really glad to have this opportunity just to sit and chat about what you're doing and what you've been working on, really spending your entire career moving toward. But one of the things that I wonder, and I just want to jump right into it, is you're incredibly talented in the financial world. You've got a great background. You express it so eloquently. There's so many things that you could be doing when it comes to finance. Why are you choosing the social impact direction?
Well, I chose this direction a long time ago when I was working in advertising for a large financial PR company, and I'd finished at the London School of Economics, and I had a dream, actually, Matt, of the 30 best PowerPoint slides I had ever written. And I thought to myself, I could just do versions of those slides for the rest of my life and I would be pretty happy. And I thought, I'm not making fun of people who make different versions of the same 30 slides all the time, because I know you've got to make a living. But that was actually part of my journey towards the church, where I realized the church was doing great things, and I was based in England at the time. And the church there formed the national denomination there called the Church of England, formed a team called the Closed Churches Team, and I was recruited into that. And so as a young person, I thought, you know what, I want to make a difference to the world. And I ended up just not looking back, except to pick up some of the tools that I had started building. And I think that's what brings us to this social finance place of saying, hold on, what are these tools that are being used in business, in philanthropy, and what are the new permutations of those tools? And I'm so excited to see these various versions of social finance, impact finance, blended finance, seeing them come together, all centered around the idea we have so much capital that's not deployed towards the things that we care about. And can we do that and also generate positive returns? It's tough, but I think it's possible.
So let's come back to social finance, because that's a term that gets thrown around in a lot of different ways. How do you define it, and how is it typically defined?
So social finance would be defined, good sources of definition from the Global Impact Investing Network or from the Global Steering Group on Impact Investing, both of whom would define impact investing as investments which are designed to have a positive environmental or social impact and a financial return. And those two, you can play around with whether they're impact first or finance first, but social finance is then focusing on the social outcomes. Now, anybody doing environmental finance will right away say, if you really understand environmental finance, you understand it's very social as well. So really impact finance, social, environmental, they're covered in there's a lot of overlap, but certainly examples of social finance would be, investing in startup indigenous businesses. I mean, what a great idea. We know that we need to do better by our indigenous persons all around the world. Other communities like Black-led organizations, how can we invest in the organizations that they are starting up to make their place in the world better and more just? Seeing other, what we might call outcomes finance-based structures, Matt, where we would say, hey, we really care that a young person who's not in employment, education, or training gets into education, employment, or training. That's an outcome we want to have. And if we have to pay social workers for that, that's a very expensive outcome to pay for. What if we could use some kind of social finance instrument to achieve that outcome? So there's social finance as a subset of impact finance. There's some examples as we get into outcomes-based financing. And it's in some ways pretty simple when you think social and finance. Okay, I can start to think of what that might mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And I noticed that it's starting to grow in adoption, that a lot of people are starting to see that charity may not have the same outcomes or the same beneficial use of funds that maybe they can find in some of these other social impact opportunities. How do you see that adoption taking place in different attitudes that you're seeing among either family offices or other institutions, but even among individuals?
Well, here's a challenging question here, because if you start thinking, well, how are we doing this otherwise? Social stuff. Is that, it used to be the church, used to be religious organizations in every culture. Second World War, that begins to change. After the Second World War, we begin to expect the government is dealing with those things, right? Now we're at a stage where we're realizing government's great at so many things. Boy, working with a really hard social problem, a ghettoized community, it's very difficult to fix that with government, right? So we kind of done the faith-based version, kind of done the government version. We're on the other side now. Okay, which version do we need now? But here's a question. It might be a little bit controversial for some family office folks. Is a private family foundation more private or more public? Here's a test. If there was no public intervention, would the foundation exist? Or would it just be part of the family business? Right? We're treating, usually with a capital gains tax intervention, we're saying as society, you as the founder, you're selling your business, we're going to tax you one way or the other, right? Either you pay it in capital gains tax or you put it into a foundation. But we as society trust you to do the right thing with that money. So whether we take it in tax, the government spends it, or it's exempt in tax and it goes into a foundation, either way, there's some kind of deal with society, right? And the deal is what gets called the disbursement quota for a foundation, which is like a leak, a guaranteed leak in the fund. Disbursement quotas around the world range from about 3.5% to 5%. At one point, Canada, where I live, was the lowest disbursement quota, so we began to domicile some of the world's largest foundations, like MasterCard Foundation, which is sitting around 40 billion right now. Because our disbursement quota was so low, it's now at 5%. Okay, so we're leaking money in grants. You foundation, you have to grant, but there's no real regulation on how you have to invest. That foundation could be invested in Saudi Aramco and then giving away all their money to the most wonderful causes in the world, and there's no law preventing that. And that, I think, is where we're at now, where foundations are saying, nothing against Saudi Aramco, by the way, we get into this whole realm of diversity, equity, inclusion, environmental, social governance lenses. We talk about these things, and with foundations, we're then going to give it away. So the question of social finance in the foundation space, family office space, is really saying, might we be interested in an investment that's also related to something we care about in our granting? And for many of your listeners in the United States, you've got program-related investments. It's a structure that allows this. And to me, that's the sweet spot.
So one of the great benefits of social investing is there's actually returns to it. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Another important definition point of social finance is we're talking about repayable capital. We're not talking about grant capital. So grant capital is 100% loss. You'll never get it back. You have things called a repayable grant, where you hope to get the grant back and grant it again. That's interesting. But generally speaking, social finance, we're talking about repayable capital, a loan or an investment that has a full intention and plan of coming back. And when it comes to family offices and foundations, the question is, do we want to invest in those things? Or would we rather invest in traditional markets, make as much return as we can so that we can give as much as we can? So all I mean to say, Matt, is the jury's out on whether social finance is a good idea. I'm certainly on the side of, I think it is, but I acknowledge that there's a lot of learning to do on there.
I don't know if you had more to add to it, though. That's terrific.
Yeah, in terms of returns, the returns on an impact finance investment are two types of returns. One is a traditional financial return, and the other is an impact return. So in some cases, and we've called this very loosely bronze, silver, and gold levels of impact investing measurement. And for some, bronze level is you had a good organization that's doing good things in the world. Sorry, Matt, hold on just one second. Let's go back to the question on returns.
All right.
Good with that?
Perfect.
What are the returns on a social finance opportunity? In general, we're talking about two types of returns. One is a traditional financial return. We lent money to this charity to buy a property. We created a mortgage at 5% annual interest. It's a very simple financial return. But we also expect some kind of impact return. So how many people did you help for how long? How many folks that were in what level of difficulty or what level of disenfranchisement in society, how did their situation become better? What we don't have in social finance is what we do have in environmental finance. In environmental finance, we have carbon footprint, reduction of greenhouse gases as two very clearly measurable types of environmental impact. Whether those are things that are interesting to you or not, they're there. Social impacts do not have any standard impact measures. There are some emerging, but the idea of a financial return and an impact return, now the investor can decide what's the kind of blend or balance that they expect from both.
Yes, and that's, for me personally, that's something I'm very passionate about, because with the social investment side, I'm coming from a nonprofit background. And I know I've seen metrics placed on all kinds of things in the social realm, but it is not being used in the same way when it comes to impact investing and social investing. And with the environmental, of course, we've got these certain metrics that we have now adopted, and they're becoming more widely adopted, more widely refined. But I'm very, very excited to see where that goes. And I think that you're kind of doing a lot of that right now with Relevin. And I guess, well, you've recently renamed it now. So the Trinity Centers Foundation, right? So you just renamed it Relevin. Tell us a little bit about that. Why the new name? What are you doing?
Thanks so much, Matt. So, the way we started was trying to figure out how can we serve local churches, bishops, denominations, and come up with a new governance structure for the properties that they own. That's how we began our foundation. So calling it the Trinity Centers Foundation it kind of explained what we do exactly as it is on the tin, as it were, as a name. Mm-hmm. But as we've grown, we've realized the outcome of our projects is much more community-based projects rather than religious-based projects. So we might take a church and now have 4 or 5 charities sharing it, or a church property with 4 or 5 acres, and there's some housing that happens on there. So we said, let's talk more about the outcome than the sources or raw materials of our work. And we started talking about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, particularly number 11, sustainable cities and communities, and said that's really important, right? We deal with urban homelessness, food security, separation of communities. Those are things people really care about, or they get upset about when it's not working out. And then also the idea of leaven or yeast, the rising agent that many communities, community organizations, charities, nonprofits that they give. So Releven is our new name that brought together all those different pieces. We also operate in the French-speaking part of Canada, in Quebec, so we needed a bilingual English-French name, and we certainly are having conversations in Europe as well. So we wanted a global name that made sense, and so Releven is our new name. We just launched it this week.
Yeah, well, and I'm glad you said that, because in my mind, when I was reading it, it was Relevin. So Releven is the name.
It's
And
just 11 with an R on the front.
it's great. And I love the double entendre of multiple languages in there too. It's
That's
terrific.
it.
Now,
Thank
one
you.
of the things that I've as I perceive what you're doing, and please correct me if I'm misstating this, but you're creating lemonade out of lemons. You got this situation
That's
of
right.
problem, crisis of faith, if you will, but that leaves these institutions with buildings, facilities that are left for nothing really, and you found a way to repurpose them into these community centers, into these places for community use and growth to improve lives. So you kind of take that vertical relationship that churches typically are mostly focused on. I'm not going to say entirely, of course, but mostly focused on, and really applying more to that horizontal focus of each other in the community. It's a really
That's it.
interesting juxtaposition, but I'd be interested to hear a little bit more of your take on that and what your goals are in that regard.
So, as your listeners are hearing you say that, if there was somebody else here, I would expect somebody to say, no, Matt, you're wrong. Churches have been doing community work for a long time. And that's true, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, we also have the issue that many religious communities are or have been specific to certain ethnic communities. So Presbyterian churches that particularly reach out to Scottish people, Episcopal churches. We know that there's a linguistic and national and ethnic divide around some of those as well, which is a challenge we have with looking at the history of faith communities. We also, in some ways, overbuilt the churches because there was such a desire to be quite different from the church up the road, First Baptist, Second Baptist, Third Baptist. And so, yes, we've done community work in the past. We've also overbuilt and perhaps needed to reposition. What's the community part? What's the faith part? Our argument is certainly that the future of governance for these properties, it's better to be community focused because it allows the different faith-based groups to have their independence and say what they want to say during their holy times without necessarily needing to operate the property that way. And that, of course, back to our great theme of social finance, that allows other investors from a municipal point of view or other foundations, other levels of government, they can now invest in that project because it's religious neutral, but perhaps faith friendly. And it gives us a different governance structure where really the front stage can be those stories of social impact. And I wanted to say this, Matt, just as an example, because another thing we find is when we talk about the concepts of social finance, people say, can you give me a few examples? What exactly are you guys talking about here? In the UK, where my wife and I were for a long time, it's about 14 years, there was a great costing of how much it cost the government to get somebody who was in, they called them a NEET, okay, a not in education, employment, or training, to get them from that stage into education or employment or training. And that cost about £7,500, okay, so just over 10,000 US dollars. What began to happen is some of the charities began to bid on that and say, we can do a better job with £7,500 at getting a NEET to not be a NEET. So what if there was a loan program that said, we'll lend you this money so you can build up that program, and you, charity or nonprofit, you'll be bonused for having achieved those objectives, and those bonuses will be used to repay the capital over here. That's an outcomes-based finance model, and it's something from a faith-based perspective that actually makes a lot of sense to faith-based communities. They can see themselves in that picture.
And what's interesting about that too is you get kind of the name that tune of bidding your way down, right? I can do this for so many dollars. But the unfortunate thing is a lot of nonprofits end up in this kind of bidding process too, with grants and other kind of funding partners. And one thing, the social impact, social funding, impact finance, whatever you want to call it, it allows
it gets
that
called
opportunity.
all of those things.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So, but it allows the opportunity for them to actually bid what they need to make the impact what it's supposed to be, instead of providing lower quality service or maybe not paying staff or not paying the right for the right necessary resources to get to the people. So I love that perspective on it too.
It also allows us to make the macro arguments. So let's take a city like San Francisco, okay? And I'm going to say this, and maybe somebody will come back and say, I got this wrong. So my apologies if I get this wrong for San Francisco. But San Francisco is an amazing global city. And it's been through an enormous struggle with urban poverty, homelessness, food security, tent, encampments. Here's a question. Those changes over the last 10 years, what has been the overall change in the overall property valuations of that entire city? Have we seen San Francisco? Have we seen maybe all American property values going up like this, but San Francisco going up like this? Is that possible? I would hazard a guess that it is. In which case, that now has an impact on all municipal tax revenues, all valuations of all people, all families and organizations in that area, all property investors. So you look right at the end, think, okay, those tent cities, what's going on here? People protesting? Is this poverty? What's going on? But did we count the cost of how much that costs? And if we did, if we could take that cost and go back over here and say, no, here are the root causes of what's going on. Is this, we're just going to pay some social workers to solve this, or do we need to get more creative over here? And I think, Matt, you and I share a great love for the nonprofit sector and experience from it. I don't think that a lot of our colleagues in the nonprofit sector have been equipped to be able to make those macroeconomic arguments, and therefore the funding, it stays very scrappy. It's not very strategic. And certainly social finance is an invitation to get to that more strategic level.
Brilliant perspective. Yes, I I relate to that strongly. But there's just so much opportunity that this all creates. Now, I do want to come back to a couple things here too. So one of the things you refer to, and oftentimes as we come back to the social aspect of this, you refer to community hubs.
Yeah.
And using these facilities as community hubs. Now, the way you have it envisioned, it's that these nonprofits can come and use it, that these other resources,
arts groups, refugee groups, food security groups, all the above.
Right. So how do these look in practice?
So anybody who's been to a WeWork, a co-working space, gets to see that firsthand. That's one method. What's interesting with a WeWork, co-working space, is you rent your desk that you use, but you also have access to some meeting rooms and maybe the kitchen and different spaces as your operation unfolds. In the case of a community hub at a local level, mainly made up of nonprofits and charities who are serving communities, trying to build resilience at a local community level, you often need large gathering spaces. You need places with chairs and tables and projection screens and coffee machines with really good coffee and bathrooms that are actually cleaned. And those are the things where people will come and say, hey, I'm a new migrant. I want to find out about employment services in my area, or I come from this country and I want to meet other people from my country who are here in this other place where I live now. Building trust where people go from being strangers to being friends is the action that happens when you're breaking isolation and loneliness. And if we can value loneliness and isolation, say these are really difficult problems for us. They decrease working productivity. They increase crime when they're not working out very well. Now we can start to say, hold on, it's very important that people are going from being strangers to being friends. So a community hub that we would define is a place where we're using a natural piece of existing social purpose real estate, like a church, but we're using it now not just on a holy day, we're using it all the time. And people, instead of coming and setting up all their gear, they set up their gear, they have their activity, and they take it out. We've eventified the operation. So it's a more efficient financial way of operating a property like that.
Now, and I'm sure you do it in multiple different ways, but who typically owns the space once you take it over, or once you've taken it through this route?
There's two main options, and there's a third one emerging. The two main options is the existing owner continues to own it. We create a lease structure for the new nonprofit entity, the community hub, to lease the property from an existing owner like a diocese or a church or a YMCA. The second is we create a new special purpose vehicle. That vehicle buys the property and it cashes out the existing owner. The third option, which is emerging, which has a lot of problems to it, but I do hear it being talked about, is there some form of a REIT, a real estate income trust? Right there with the I is a problem, the income, because we're trying to cream the income off as an investment vehicle, which now goes against the idea of local community wealth building where we want to keep rents low. So the REIT idea, or some kind of portfolio, you could say, well, diocese or church denominations, those are a kind of a portfolio. They generally are not functioning as portfolios. It drives me nuts when I hear church organizations talking about assets under management, because of course they're not under management. They're under a network. It's very difficult to manage them, which is why they're in such a pickle. So those are three large ways, and the REIT or larger portfolio is something that we would need some of the most serious foundations to be very seriously leaning in to create a larger portfolio structure like that would not be susceptible to private market forces and then dismantle it and cut it into pieces. That's a very difficult part of our work.
Yeah, you come at it from a very interesting perspective, being in the clergy in the Anglican Church, right?
That's it.
But with that, you've kind of entered into a world of the non-discussion topics, right? Of
Yeah.
religion, politics, and even personal finance in there, right? So, how do you find yourself in this world? And I do have a question about government to follow up on that.
Yeah. Well, I'll answer you with an answer on government, because the last time I used exactly that phrase was when I was in front of quite a few of our federal cabinet ministers in Canada, our congresspersons in Canada, and our prime minister was at that gathering as well. And I was very shocked that they had invited us to present our fund and our work. And I said to them, I said, my mother always taught me we're not allowed to talk about politics or religion at the dinner table. But here I am in Ottawa. I understand we can talk politics, but I was told we're still not supposed to talk religion. So it's nice that you invited me, and it's good that you invited me, because religious organizations are the largest single category of social purpose real estate. And so when we look at it that way and say, fine, we don't actually, from a government and a foundation level, we don't really want to talk religion. But from a social purpose real estate level, and from a city's point of view, UN SDG number 11, sustainable cities and communities, we have to. We can't afford not to talk about the impact of faith communities. But I think disarming it that way is a good way of helping those who feel very uncomfortable in a faith-based environment. And we get right into it, man. We talk about, how are you going to deal with a Catholic investor that says, my first objectives are, I don't want to talk about medically assisted dying. I don't want to talk about abortion, and I really don't want to talk about same-sex relationships. So now, please, can we go forward? You think, okay, let's roll up our sleeves on this. Let's take a deep breath. Let's look at all society and realize, aren't some of our biggest problems that left and right have polarized? So here we are, we're at a local level now. How could we step back and figure out, what do we have in common here before we start with what it is that we want to fight, our different sides with? And certainly religious organizations they're prone to that, right? To saying, these are the things we believe. We own these properties. You walk in that door, you better do things the way we believe it. I understand that. As a priest, pastor in the church for nearly 20 years, which is also part of my background, I have to say to my religious brothers and sisters, I don't think it works. I don't think it's very effective at getting people excited about your view or our view of faith. So yeah, we absolutely get into that, and we do it with love.
Very much love, I'm sure. But now I do want to ask you about the government collaboration, because really you create a situation where there's a win-win-win, where the nonprofits win. You could even add a fourth win to that: the nonprofits, the churches themselves, if they retain ownership. Certainly you, and then of course the community itself. All are coming in benefiting from this structure. Oh, I forgot government in there too. They would win too, because their society is being helped by these services. How do you go about those conversations and engage in them and create that scenario?
So right away into that one, we would differentiate quite quickly between federal, state level, and municipal governments, because they have different purviews, different interests. And of course, we all want to sit down and say, doesn't government just want to be at this table? And think, well, government, there's 20 competing interests when we look at any one project on there, just from government interests. For instance, there might be a municipal government interest in building tax revenue, and another municipal government interest at dealing with tent cities. And how do we balance those out? From a state level, dealing with healthcare, social issues, the cost of dealing with unemployment, and at a federal level, national level, we're also talking about issues of immigration. So even just in one little community hub, we might get all of that going on there. So yes, we definitely want to say, here's the deal. These properties are on the corner of Main and Main. They're on the bus routes. They're opposite the library, the city hall. They're where the city wants to happen. If you were to draw a circle around what used to be the old vibrant downtown, and then you had the suburbs out there, and now all the hipster people are saying, we don't want to be in the suburbs. We want to be in the center. Well, we've got those places there. So we've actually started, Matt, this program called the Roundtables program for Relevin, where we we bring cities together, city by city, to bring all those folks together. And for the foundations, back to our family office folks, very often they are looking at this saying, okay, hold on a second. This is game on here, because if we could really deal with racially inflated homelessness, food security, we're interested. If we can really deal with these communities that we know are on the margins, we're interested. And so that's the sweet spot that we're trying to build. And a good social finance program, in my view, will do that building, where it is win, 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 risk, 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 risk mitigation, risk mitigation, risk mitigation. And now we have a social finance instrument. That's the dream.
You bring up one more brilliant question with that. When you talk about risk, it's one thing to assess risk financially, but what are the risks when you're talking about a social enterprise or social impact venture?
Well, let's just make it pretty easy, because it's obvious, right? You lend to you get a bunch of charities together to buy an old church and turn it into something good, and you give them a $5 million mortgage, and you hope that they're going to have enough revenue coming in to service some small sliver of that debt, which is usually what you'd end up doing, and might call it patient capital. So, just the most minimal possible debt service on that thing, right? But they don't make it. Something goes wrong. People fall apart. They whatever. The nonprofit sector, very often people are not paid very well. People quit. There's fights. The whole thing's falling apart. Who's left standing? The fund who issued the mortgage. This is why there are no traditional financial institutions that do this kind of lending. In the US, CDFIs, community development finance institutions, they are doing some of this. And this is the key risk. What happens when the project melts down? Debt service is not happening. How do you take charge of that project and restructure it? And for us, it's as simple as having this conversation and making sure it's embedded into all the financing documents. And there's a clear plan. What happens if this project stops working? How do we bring all of the A team back together again to say, what are we going to do? And if the hardest, a mortgage says, we're going to lend you this money, and if you don't pay, we're going to take your stuff and sell it, right? That's a short version of a mortgage agreement. When it comes to social purpose real estate, that last part, we're going to take your stuff and sell it. Ultimately, if you aren't ready to do that, then you can't actually issue repayable. You can't be creating a security. You have to be willing to deal with that. And that's probably the number one risk.
That's a great point. You just create a collateralized structure. Just like you would in the other deal, you just have to structure it specifically for that nonprofit sector or that social service sector.
Now, you could say, just to have a bit more fun on that, there could be a guarantee layer, and there's some really interesting foundations. I'll name the Kresge Foundation in the US that have done some really clever work with large foundation balance sheets to say, we'll stand behind some of these structures. And ultimately, that means that what to do with that property would fall on the guarantor. And that's a softer landing. And I think there are ways of doing that. Could be a municipality. There's some municipalities have issued loan guarantees. But ultimately, whoever guarantees is still going to have to figure out what to do with that property. And that's at the heart of our work.
Ultimately, you're building something right now. You're building a lot of things, to be honest, but you're building stuff right now in your life. What do you ultimately hope is going to be your legacy when it's all said and done?
There's a great phrase, Matt, from one of my former like a bishop character. It's called an archdeacon. And he had this great line. He says, an empty church is to its city like the empty palace of a long forgotten king. And that's to me, a chilling statement about seeing these properties sitting empty, unused, these church properties. My hope is that there is a new model that exists and that we just play our part. We love to collaborate with as many people as we can. We don't need to be the heroes in this story, but we want to play our part in seeing a new reality where social purpose real estate has a way of being constantly redeployed. In the same way, you wouldn't see an office building or a residential tower. You wouldn't see them empty. You would see somebody renovating them and finding new types of tenants. And I would like to see that happen. And I don't see how that will happen without the philanthropic sector and without government. So to me, the social finance instrument will be required. And I hope that we look back at lots of things we thought that would work. it didn't, but we tried it, and here's why we tried that. So I think we realize we're on the are we on the very front? I don't know, but we're towards the front end of this kind of journey, and I hope we play our part in pioneering. But in the end, I hope there's a new paradigm for social purpose real estate. It's as simple as that.
Well, Graham, that's a great response, and thank you so much for all you're doing to take care of folks in their local communities. And thanks for this time with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Matt. It's been a real privilege.
All right, you bet. Take care.
Thank you.